There are some things in life you don't rush. You don't rush grief. You don't rush a good pot of collard greens. And you don't rush the moment when you finally understand that the person standing in front of you is not who you thought they were. The call came on a Wednesday. Not a text. A call. My son-in-law never called me. In 4 years of marriage to my daughter, he had spoken directly to me maybe a dozen times, and half of those were at holiday dinners, when he had no choice. So when I saw his name on my phone screen, I felt something shift in my stomach before I even answered. I was in the backyard of my house in Birmingham, deadheading the roses my husband, Edmund, had planted the spring before he passed. That was 11 years ago now, but I still tend those roses the way he taught me. Slow. Patient. You take the dead ones off, so the living ones have room to grow, I answered. Hey, Yvonne. His voice was casual, almost too casual, the way someone sounds when they've rehearsed what they're about to say. I was hoping we could talk about the cabin. The cabin. I had bought it 3 years prior, with the life insurance money from Edmund and the savings I had tucked away during 31 years of working as a registered nurse. Edmund always said we'd have a place in the mountains someday, a place where the air was different, where you could sit on a porch and hear absolutely nothing, except the wind in the trees and maybe a creek if you listened hard enough. He didn't live to see it, so I built it for both of us. It took almost 2 years to finish. I drove up to Mentone, Alabama, every other weekend during construction. I picked the wood paneling for the walls myself. I chose the stone for the fireplace, a deep grey slate that reminded me of the colour of Edmund's eyes when the light hit them sideways. I planted a vegetable garden on the east side of the property and a wild flower patch along the gravel path to the front door. When it was done, I sat on the porch alone with a glass of sweet tea, looked out at the ridge, and I talked to my husband. I told him we made it. I told him this was ours. I started sharing it with family the first summer. My daughter Tamsin came up with her husband Dwight and their 2 kids. My younger son came with his wife the following fall. My sister drove up from Mobile for a long weekend in October. The cabin was meant to be shared. That was always part of the plan. What was not part of the plan was what Dwight said to me that Wednesday. We've been thinking, he said, and already I noticed it was we, not Tamsin and I, just we, like he was the spokesman for a committee I hadn't been invited to join. The kids are getting older. It would be really good for them to have a consistent place to go in the summers. Somewhere that feels like theirs. I waited. We were thinking, maybe this summer, we could kind of have the cabin to ourselves as a family, just the 4 of us, so the kids can really settle in and call it home. I still waited because I was sure there was more. There had to be more. There had to be some second half of that sentence where he explained what this had to do with me and why he was calling instead of my daughter. But there wasn't more. So you're asking me not to come, I said. Well, he said, and I could hear him smiling in the way people smile when they're about to say something they know is wrong, but have convinced themselves is reasonable. Just for this summer, we really want the kids to bond with the space. Bond with the space. That is a 47-year-old cabin in the mountains of Alabama that I paid for with money from my husband's death. My grandchildren do not need to bond with it. They need to be invited to it by their grandmother, who owns it, and be grateful for the invitation. I did not say any of that. Not yet. I said, let me talk to Tamsin, and I ended the call. I sat down on the back steps of my Birmingham house. The roses were still there. The afternoon light was doing that golden thing it does in June. Long and warm and slanted. And somewhere in the neighbour's yard I could hear a sprinkler turning. I thought about Edmund. I thought about the first summer we were married, when we rented a little A-frame up near Gatlinburg, and we ate sandwiches on a folding table because we couldn't afford real furniture, and we thought that was the funniest thing in the world. I thought about who I had become in the years since he died, and whether that woman, the one who planted wildflowers and tended roses and drove 2 hours every other weekend to watch a dream get built, was someone who could be told by her son-in-law that she didn't need to come to her own property. I decided she was not. I called Tamsin that same evening. She answered on the third ring, and before I could say anything, she said, "Mom, I know Dwight called you. Not I'm sorry, not can we talk about this. Just, I know," which told me she had known before he called, which told me this had been decided without me. "That cabin belongs to me," I said. Not angry, just clear. I want to make sure we both understand that. "Of course, Mom," she said, and her voice had the tone I had been hearing more and more in recent years, the tone of a woman managing her mother, the way you manage someone who is getting older and doesn't quite keep up anymore. Patient, a little tired, slightly condescending in a way that probably wasn't even conscious. Nobody's saying it doesn't. Dwight just thinks it would be good for us to have it to ourselves for one summer. That's all. And what do I do for the summer? Mom, you have your house. You have your garden. You have your friends. I have my house. I have my garden. I have my friends. Like I was a child being told there were plenty of other toys to play with. "I'll think about it," I said, and I let her go. But I had already thought about it. I had already thought about it during the entire drive home from the backyard steps to the kitchen table, carrying those roses I'd trimmed, and the weight of something I hadn't quite named yet. The thing I had been not naming for about 2 years, actually, ever since Dwight had started coming to the cabin with a different energy. The first time, he had been curious. The second time, comfortable. By the third time, he had opinions. He thought the gravel driveway should be paved. He thought the garden took up too much of the yard. He thought the fireplace mantel was too dark and should be redone in white oak. I had smiled and said nothing. I did not say I chose that mantel. I drove 40 minutes to a salvage yard outside Fort Payne to find it because it matched the color of something I loved. This is not your house. Because at the time I still believed that some things didn't need to be said between family. I understand now that was my mistake. The following month I drove up to the cabin on a Friday afternoon. Tamsin knew I was coming. We had spoken twice since the phone call with Dwight, and both times she had been pleasant and evasive, and I had been pleasant right back, which in retrospect was not my finest strategy. But I drove up because I wanted to see my own place, because I had done nothing wrong, because I was not going to spend my summer in Birmingham having my roses tell me to be patient. The key did not work. I stood at the front door of my cabin that I built, that I paid for, that I painted the shutters on myself because the painters wanted $400 extra, and I decided I could do it for free, and I did, and my key did not work. They had changed the locks. I want to say that I stayed calm. I want to say I stood there in a dignified fashion and processed my feelings and made a rational plan. What actually happened was I stood there for a full 30 seconds, not breathing, just staring at the keyhole, as if I had somehow put the key in wrong, as if the problem was me and not what was very obviously happening. Then I called a locksmith from a town 20 minutes down the mountain, and I told him I was the property owner, and I asked him to come out that same afternoon. He was there within the hour. He asked me for proof of ownership, which I had in the glove compartment of my car because I keep important documents with me the way Edmund always told me to, and he had the door open in 10 minutes. Once I was inside, I called my daughter. She didn't answer. I called 3 more times. Nothing. Dwight called me back an hour later. "You weren't supposed to be up there," he said, and I noticed he said without any particular emotion. No guilt, no apology. Just a fact that he was correcting on my behalf, as though I had made an error in scheduling. Dwight, I said, very slowly and very clearly, whose name is on the deed to this property? Silence. Whose name, I said again, is on the deed? Yvonne, I would like you to answer my question. More silence. Then, yours. That's right, I said. Mine. This is my property. You do not have the authority to change the locks on my property. You do not have the authority to tell me when I can or cannot come here. And I need you to understand, right now on this phone call, that what you have done today is something I will not forget. He started to say something about the kids, about the summer, about how things had gotten complicated. I let him talk for a moment. Then I said, I'll be in touch, and I hung up. I spent the night at the cabin. I sat by that fireplace, the grey slate one that I chose myself, that Dwight thought was too dark. And I drank a cup of chamomile tea, and I looked at the framed photo on the mantel. It's a picture of Edmund and me from our 25th anniversary trip to the Smoky Mountains. He is squinting a little against the afternoon sun, and his arm is around my shoulder, and we are both laughing at something my sister said from behind the camera. I do not remember what it was. I just remember the laughing. I talked to him that night. I do that sometimes when things get heavy. I told him what had happened. I told him I didn't know yet what I was going to do, but I knew it was going to be decisive. Edmund was a decisive man. He believed that the longer you let a wound sit open, the worse the infection gets. He would not have liked any of what was happening, but he would have known exactly what to do about it. By morning, I did too. I drove back to Birmingham and I called my attorney. Her name is Roslyn, and I have known her for 22 years, and she is the kind of woman who does not waste your time with qualifications. I told her everything. She told me the situation was straightforward. I owned the property outright, no shared title, no listed co-owners. Dwight and Tamsin had no legal standing. She sent them a letter that same week informing them that any future unauthorized changes to the property, locks, fixtures, structure, anything, would be treated as trespassing and property interference, and that I would pursue legal remedies if necessary. Tamsin called me the night the letter arrived. She was crying. I had been waiting for this call, honestly. Not because I wanted her to cry, but because I knew the letter would make things real in a way that no amount of phone conversations had managed to make them real. As long as it was just words between family, it could stay soft and vague and unresolved. A letter from an attorney is not soft. It does not allow for vagueness. "Mom," she said, and her voice was the voice of my daughter, my firstborn, the girl I had rocked to sleep for the first 2 years of her life, during the worst of her colic, when no one else could settle her. That voice still did something to me. It always would. "Mom, we didn't mean for it to go this far." "I know," I said. "Dwight thought." "Tamsin," I said gently, "I know what Dwight thought. What I need to know is what you thought. When he changed those locks, did you know?" A long pause. "Yes," she said very quietly. That one word cost her something to say. I could hear it, and it cost me something to hear it, because there is a particular kind of pain that comes from realizing that the person you love has allowed someone else to make them smaller than you raised them to be. I did not raise my daughter to stand by while her mother's property was locked from her. I did not raise her to let a man speak for her in phone calls she should have been making herself. I raised her to know her own mind and to use her own voice, and to understand that the women in our family had always stood up straight when it counted. "Then, that's what I need you to think about," I said. "Not what Dwight thinks is best, what you think is right." We were quiet for a moment. "Are you going to sell it?" she asked. I had been thinking about that. I won't pretend I hadn't. "No," I said. "I'm not going to sell it." And I meant it. because selling would have been letting them win in a different way. Selling would have meant the cabin stopped being mine without being theirs, and that would have satisfied no one and honoured nothing. I had built that place. I had chosen every board and every stone and every wildflower seed. I had carried Edmund there in my heart and set him down somewhere beautiful. I was not going to hand that away because my son-in-law had gotten too comfortable with something that didn't belong to him. What I did instead was make a list. Over the next 2 weeks, I contacted a property management company in the area. I arranged for a combination lockbox, the code known only to me and the management company, and for emergencies, my younger son. I updated my estate documents with Roslyn to make explicitly clear how the cabin was to be handled after my death, and that clarity had nothing to do with Dwight and everything to do with protecting what I had built. I replanted the vegetable garden, which had been partially dug up. I do not know why, and I chose not to ask. I put up a new bird feeder on the back porch. I bought 2 new rocking chairs because the old ones were getting weathered, and I wanted something that was chosen after all of this, something that had nothing to do with what came before. Then I called my 2 closest friends, women I have known since before my children were born, women who have buried husbands and raised children and navigated everything life hands you when it decides to be serious, and I invited them up for a long weekend in late July. We sat on that porch for 3 days. We cooked real food. We played cards until midnight. We talked about everything and nothing. Odessa told a story about her ex-son-in-law that made us laugh until 2 of us had to wipe tears. My friend Clementine brought a bottle of bourbon she had been saving for something worth celebrating, and she said the occasion was me, and that was enough. On the last evening, we sat in those new rocking chairs as the sun went down over the ridge, and I watched the light go orange and then pink, and then that deep purple blue that happens right before the stars come out in a place with no city glow to compete with them. I thought about Edmund. I thought about those sandwiches in the A-frame. I thought about the roses in my backyard that were probably doing just fine without me for a few days. I thought about my daughter. Things between Tamsin and me are not the same. I don't pretend they are. There is a dinner every couple of months, and the grandchildren come to Birmingham for school breaks, and we are cordial in the way that 2 people can be cordial when they love each other but have not yet finished grieving something. I do not know if we will get back to what we were. I hope we do. I keep a door open toward that hope, the way you keep a window cracked in autumn, not wide, not cold, just enough to let fresh air in when the time is right. Dwight has not been to the cabin since. Tamsin came up once in September by herself. She didn't call ahead. She just sent a text that said she was in the area and asked if the code had changed. I sent her the code. When she arrived, I was already there, reading on the porch in the afternoon quiet. We didn't talk about any of it. We made tea and we sat, and we watched the birds at the feeder, and she said at some point, "Daddy would have loved this place." "He does love it," I said. She nodded. We didn't say anything else about it. But she stayed for dinner, and she helped me wash the dishes after. And when she left, she hugged me for a long time at the door. Some things you can't rush. Grief, collard greens. The slow work of repairing what has been pulled apart by carelessness and entitlement, and one too many times of not saying what should have been said while it was still easy to say. But some things you have to do quickly, decisively. With a clear head and your name on the deed and a locksmith's number saved in your phone. I learned the difference between those 2 things that summer, and I intend to keep the lesson.